Welcome to episode 360 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Robert D'Amico, who served in the FBI for 27 years. In this episode, Rob reviews his involvement as a member of the FBI's elite hostage rescue team, HRT, in a Navy SEALs mission to rescue 4 Americans taken hostage by Somali pirates on their sailing vessel, the Quest. And after the mission's deadly outcome, Rob's capture of the pirates' shore-based negotiator. Rob D'Amico's first assignment was to the Miami Division, where he apprehended violent felons as a member of a multi-agency violent crime fugitive task force. Rob then transitioned into deep undercover work against U.S. and Italian-based organized crime families. His 10 years in the United States Marine Corps working reconnaissance missions led to Rob's selection to HRT, where he served as a sniper. During Rob's time on HRT, he negotiated hostage releases and exchanges while operating under the highest pressures against pirates, warlords, and leaders of terrorist networks. Rob was named the first FBI HRT tactical liaison to the Joint Operations Command, National Mission Force Units, and the United States Marine Corps, where he oversaw all FBI personnel embedded in counterterrorism task forces around the globe and was frequently deployed on no-notice overseas contingency operations. He ended his time on HRT as the Deputy Operations Chief based in Quantico, Virginia. Before and after this assignment, Rob was the Assistant Legal Attaché, ALAT, in Bagram, Afghanistan, and the Legal Attaché, LEGAT, in Kabul, Afghanistan. After returning to the Bureau's domestic efforts, he led the counter-drone unit and for several years was tasked with protecting national events such as the Super Bowl and the World Series, before retiring from the FBI. Currently, Rob is founder and principal consultant for Sierra One Consulting, providing airspace security and surveillance services. He is a public speaker, provides news commentary for the top national news media in the country, and is currently under contract as a national security and law enforcement analyst for MSNBC and NBC. Rob is also the host of the podcast Inside the Line with Rob on YouTube, but coming to podcast apps soon. This episode is dedicated to the Navy SEALs troop deployed to rescue the 4 Americans on board the Quest. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to remind you that in about 6 months, actually January of 2026, I'll be celebrating 10 years of hosting and producing FBI Retired Case File Review. And as we lead up to that milestone, I'm going to start tweaking things around here. Maybe a new intro, a new theme song, a refreshed name for the podcast. I don't know. You'll have to wait and see. But if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear how you think I could make this show even better. This is more than just a true crime or law enforcement podcast. It's a social cause to make sure the public knows who the FBI is and has always been, and what the FBI does and has always been doing, working in the communities and around the world to protect and serve. And if you hear of anyone who has any questions about that, tell them to listen to the podcast. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Robert D'Amico. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Now, I know I say that I'm excited to speak to all of my guests, and I really, really am. But wow, when I was looking over your bio and your resume, I thought to myself, this is going to be a fascinating case review because you've had a career, as the saying goes, like no other. And basically, it appears that your FBI career is really reflective of your military service.
Yeah, it did tie in fairly well. It helped me in those areas when I was working with the military, just understanding what they're saying. And before I got in, the military and FBI were actually very separate and they had two different lingos. And then after 9/11, I was actually doing reserve duty at the Pentagon. And one of the 3 stars, this Marine General Newbold, called me in and everyone's like, "Did you get in trouble?" I'm like, "I don't think so." And he just asked me to really help translate interagency speak because at the time the acronyms and everything were different. It helped me in what I was doing and it just made things really fun.
Now, I just read your bio to everyone so they have some idea of what things that you were doing both in the FBI and the military. And there were so many cases, again, that tied into both of those careers. But we decided that you were going to talk today about a case that you worked involving Somali pirates.
Yeah, I guess the case I'm most proud of to a point, it was a tragedy followed by an unbelievable manhunt and then a great outcome if you can have a great outcome in court, but then another tragedy on the end of it that we'll talk about. I always tell people, like, I never did anything in the FBI alone. And unfortunately, like the FBI, as you know, promotion system's kind of based on how you write what you did. And I just led maybe a team and just worked with phenomenal people across the government, literally military, CIA, everyone I dealt with helped us tremendously to get this done. You know, a few speed bumps in there, a few people that didn't cooperate as much, but everyone, for the most part, it was a team thing. And I just tell it from my eyes. I never want to say this is about me. It's about the team of folks that really did everything to make this happen.
Well, definitely, I could see how you would need all of those people, all of those partners involved in this international hostage crisis event. Now, when most people think of Somali pirates, we think of Captain Phillip and Tom Hanks. But the reality is that these type of takeovers of ships in, the seas and the oceans happens on a regular basis. Is that true?
It did. It's cut back a little bit because they figured out you put armed men on ships. It really keeps the pirates away. Piracy in Somalia, and I didn't know this until after. We went over there with really not knowing what it was all about, but it started as defending their home waters. So basically, fishermen from Yemen and some other countries would come and they would come in close and fish the waters off of Somalia. And it was taking their what they saw as their natural resource of the fish that was close, and they started kind of defending it. It ended up the famine and everything else going on in Somalia, and they started seeing these big ships, and they started taking them, bringing them closer to land, and they had formal process that they would then ransom them, the ships back to these big companies, and they were getting millions of dollars. The other thing that came in is when they first started doing it, a warlord would put a pirate ship together, and he'd have to buy the boats, the motors, the fuel for it, the food, and put his guys on it. And only about half of these guys come back. It's a very dangerous life. And then when that happened, this one warlord would be out all the money and all his people. So they started putting crews together where it would be maybe 4 warlords. Each would put a certain amount of their own guys on the boat. One would pay for the boat, one would pay for the fuel, one would pay for the food, so that if they lost them, they each weren't taking these huge losses. So it's kind of spreading the risk of loss. And that comes into play actually in ours because we didn't know that. We didn't know that we thought all the pirates on the boat were together and they were a group, and they weren't. There were maybe like 4 individual teams of people that were familiar with each other. And usually the one warlord that put the most money into this pirate crew, he was the main guy. And it was his negotiator. And there was a negotiator on land that he would have Google alerts and other things because there's no communication back and forth. So that negotiator would listen for a ship getting pirated, and then he would start doing the research on who owned the vessel so they could reach out to him and start negotiating. That also comes into this case a lot. So understanding that after the fact was tough because it would have helped us out there, because when you know how things work, then you can deal with them better.
Now, this particular case, it's my understanding that it wasn't this big corporate ship, but it was a private craft.
Yeah, it was a sailboat. It's about a 51-foot sailboat based out of San Diego, owned by a couple. And they got another couple, I think separately, but another man and woman to help sail around. They're going to sail around the world, and they're passing out Bibles to promote Christianity. They were actually warned, we found out later that the woman's friends said, hey, like, aren't you scared about the pirates? And she said, it's a big ocean. We have a little ship. And unfortunately, that obviously didn't affect things well. We found out later the crew that was out was on a Yemenis fishing boat, and they were looking for a big ship to pirate. And they were kind of running low on fuel and everything else. And when they woke up one morning, they literally saw this sailboat with an American flag on it. Now, there was 19 of them on this Yemenis fishing boat. And they saw the American flag and thought, the Americans pay, which is exactly the opposite. Other countries were actually paying to get their boats back, but America really wasn't. But they were falsely thinking that America would pay. So all 19 of them jumped on this small sailboat. It barely fit them. Their idea was they were going to take the sailboat back towards Somalia, and then they're going to come across most likely a big cargo ship that then some of them can get off and pirate that ship and this one. So the plan was, we'll take this one, we'll start back towards Somalia, we'll come across a bigger boat, and then we'll get on that, and then we'll have both of them. And that was the plan. Again, found out that much later after talking to some of these guys.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the two couples that were on the ship, where they were from?
So the main ones that owned it were from San Diego. The gal who volunteered first, she was from the Southern California area, and the guy that volunteered, I think they had a prior relationship that was broken off. And I don't know if it was his way to try to fix it, to be on this smaller sailboat, sailing around the world. But they're all from the California area, where the extended families were. I think some were from up in Washington State area. Again, this is 2011. Some of those details I'm not too sure about, but they all were from the West Coast. And the couple that owned the boat, they had advertised in some of these like sailing newsletters and stuff that they needed 2 people to help crew the boat around the world.
And when you say they volunteered, they were volunteering to a Christian organization?
It wasn't an organization. They just wanted to have this with them so that when they go over and kind of spread the word about Christianity, it wasn't formal. I think there was a church or something behind it that they helped raise some money, but it wasn't a formal process like, we're going to do this and we're going to go here and this is how we're going to do it. There might have been some backing with it, but it wasn't like, some of the things that you see that are more formal and laid out.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop asking questions, and I'm going to let you just take us through the events. What time of the year was this, and where are we, what body of water are we in, and all of those details. And I'm going to sit back and listen.
Yeah. So it started kind of the week before. I was the FBI hostage rescue team liaison to a couple special military units. We call them special mission units, and they were under the JSOC umbrella. So there was a SEAL unit at a Dam Neck and then an Army unit at a Fort Bragg. And I was literally going between, I'd spend half a week at one, half a week at another. And then I was living in North Carolina.
Rob, you've already started dropping those acronyms. So why don't we just let everybody know what JSOC is?
Okay. Sorry. Joint Special Operations Command. So that's a 3-star admiral or general. It's part of the special forces, but it's actually outside of Green Berets and it does have Rangers in them, but it's made up of special intel folks, logistics folks, and then there's 2 operational tier units. They call them tier 1, a Navy and an Army one, SEALs, and then Army special mission unit. And when their main job is counterterrorism, but very specialized one in hostage rescue. So they are the national mission force to do hostage rescue. And they're on alert. There's squadrons of them. That's where the FBI hostage rescue team kind of takes the same shape as them. We train together. Tactics are a lot of the same. We know each other. And I was a liaison to those 2 units because a lot of times after 9/11, people that do terrorism or violent events, crimes against American citizens, we have the ability to bring them back sometimes and charge them in U.S. courts and prosecute them. And when you do that, you really want to have a law enforcement person be able to testify. So as we're doing these joint military FBI or joint law enforcement military ops, we started embedding HRT operators to go on them so that if it did come to like some type of prosecution, we had FBI agents that could testify in U.S. courts. One, the special mission units really didn't want to give their names in court that you have to. And some of the things that they processes and things we don't want to come out. So having some FBI HRT guys there helps them stay out of the courts, and it helps them prosecute the cases as they come back. So I was going between the units and coordinating as missions went on. They may need 2 FBI guys. They may need some other stuff. So that's the job of the liaison. I was talking to both headquarters and satisfying what they need. And if they're going to train, we train with them. I would get a couple guys to do the workups because we were embedded with them in Iraq and Afghanistan a lot. So we were doing that. But now that we were coming out of those areas into other situations, the chances of prosecuting back in a U.S. court were a lot more likely because in a war zone, different things are going on. But in like Africa and other places, you didn't have the same infrastructure there to do anything. So they would probably end up coming back to the U.S. courts. And that's one thing I was talking to a buddy of mine now. Mitch was the operations chief at the SEAL unit. And it was on a Wednesday. And we were talking about just this thing, how to do things so that they could stand up in court and such. And he said, hey, look, like, I know you live in North Carolina. Like, if I called you and said, hey, I got to have you here because we need to go overseas with you, how long would it take for you to get from your house to the unit? And I thought about it, and I'm like, it's about a 4-hour drive. And I said, well, if I'm going blue lights, I can probably make it in 3 hours. He goes, okay, just wondering. And then, so that same week, my wife had been telling me that I wasn't spending enough time with my son, that I needed to be home more and spend more time. He's growing up and kind of missing out on things I do with my dad. So I said, all right, I'm going to come home early Friday. I'm going to pick him up from high school. And then we're going to go get some pizza at his favorite pizza place, and we're going to go do some stuff. That was a plan. So Friday morning comes, I wake up in Virginia Beach, I drive home, and I pick him up like right about 3:00. As people don't know, you can't use your bureau car for personal stuff, and you can't have other people in it. I drove to my house, got my personal car, drove to the high school, and then we drove up to Morehead City in North Carolina, which is about 20 minutes from my house. We literally order the pizza. We're waiting for it to come out of the oven, and I get a phone call, and it's one of those just blank U.S. government numbers. So I know it's either FBI or I know it's one of these military units. I answer, and it's Mitch. And he goes, hey, you know that thing we talked about on Wednesday, right? I said, yeah. He goes, I need you to do that now. And I need you to be prepared to leave the country right after that.
Did he know that something was up when he asked that, or was he just asking the question for future reference?
So on Wednesday, he just asked that to know because he was just coming in as a deputy ops guy, and we were talking about FBI helping with some things for prosecution. So when we were talking about it, he also asked how fast we could get someone from HRT or headquarters down and how fast I could make it back. The incident that we're about to talk about didn't happen until Friday. It's not like he knew something going on. He just literally asked that question. When this came up that they got put on alert because of a sailboat that was pirated, his first thing was like, well, let me call Rob. We just talked about it. And he wasn't going to tell me what happened over the phone. He didn't tell me that there's a pirate. He just told me, I need you to do that, and I need you to be ready to leave. So I looked at Russ. I said, get the pizza. We got to go. And I called Russ's mom, and I said, hey, I'm coming back. I got a call. I have to leave right away. Can you take all the things I took out? Because I'd taken all my clothes and stuff out of my work truck to wash. And so I said, put them back in the truck. Just throw them in there. I'll be home in about 20 minutes with Russ, and I have to leave. She didn't give me grief. She knew that if I got a call like that I had to go. So she put all the stuff back in my work truck. I made it back with Russell and jumped in my car, and I started driving north. And I had a Tahoe. As you know, a lot of FBI vehicles, you have red and blue lights because some states police are red, some states police are blue, and the fire department has the opposite. So on my Tahoe, I had red and blue lights embedded in the grill and in the windshield and stuff like that. So I throw on my lights and I start driving. I'm driving north on Route 17. It's kind of like a coastal highway. It goes from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. I probably have my cruise at 90, 95 miles an hour. And it's late afternoon, so there's definitely some after work traffic, but it is coastal North Carolina. It's not like DC. So I'm flying up there, and as I'm doing it, I'm calling the operations officer at the hostage rescue team, Art, and said, hey, look, you need to call headquarters and get approval for me to go forward. And by that time, I found out from Art, one of the executive assistants at HRT, that this American sailboat had been pirated. And that's what I was obviously talking about, because Mitch didn't tell me that. So they told me what was going on. And I said, hey, look, I'm driving up there now. I have all my kit with me. I'm prepared to leave, but I need obviously headquarters permission to do that. Also, I asked for a negotiator to possibly take with me because, as you know, on a lot of these international kidnappings, the FBI has a crisis negotiation unit that does overseas kidnappings. So asked for one of them. The guy on duty was Dale. He was actually former HRT guy and a former Green Beret. So he kind of fit the mission profile. So as I'm driving, I'm calling back and forth. I knew HRT had a operator in Nairobi, forward deployed, was helping the FBI folks out there on doing different things. So Brian was his name. I'd known him for a number of years. I met him in Iraq when he was a former Green Beret, and I met him there and I woke him up because obviously it's probably about 8 hours ahead. So I call him up, I wake him up and I said, hey, look, pack your kit, bare minimum, but have mission essential stuff. I need you to go down. The military folks that I was talking to that controlled the SEALs and stuff, JSOC, they had a detachment in Nairobi helping fight terrorism in Somalia, Al-Shabaab. So we end up said, hey, pack your kit if you can. There's a fly team guy, which is a fly team in the FBI. I know what it is. It's a unit that specializes in deploying for investigations, kind of like HRT deploys for tactical stuff. These guys deploy for, special counterterrorism investigations, and they work for the counterterrorism division. And this really wasn't terrorism. It was piracy, but it was an emergency. So got permission for Brian and Rob to go down to Djibouti, where the SEALs their headquarters were at. So they had guys forward deployed in Djibouti. So told Brian to go down to the task force guys. There's a plane going to be waiting for them to fly them into Djibouti. I said, I am probably driving up to Dam Neck, getting on a plane, a C-17, and flying over. And I was going to meet him over there. He diligently said, Roger that. And I said, we'll figure it out on the side when I see you again, how things are going to go. So he was working his way through that. And again, in the meantime, I'm driving. And for some reason, I had a governor on that Tahoe at 100 miles an hour. So I had the cruise set at like 99. And I'm coming up, I'm looking at my time, and I'm probably going to make it right at 3 hours. I got approval to go forward. I know Dale was driving down from DC down to Dam Neck. I was going to meet him there. And I'm driving. I passed by a police officer, a trooper that was coming south. And again, I'm doing 99 miles an hour, but I had my red and blue lights on. And all of a sudden, I see him do a quick U-turn. And I had passed a couple cops before. None of them thought anything of it when I went by him. And I see him turn around, and then I see him catching up to me really quickly. So I'm like, wow, is he going to pull me over? And sure enough, he gets behind me. I pull into the right lane, thinking if he might go around me. He pulls into the right lane. I said, damn it. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I kind of jam on the brakes to pull over because now I'm pissed. I'm trying to get up there. So when I stop, I jump out of the vehicle, which probably I shouldn't have done, but I have my FBI creds up over my head going, FBI, what are you doing? And he's now startled that I got out of the vehicle so quick. And he's trying to undo a seatbelt, and, I can see he's actually kind of going for the weapon as he's trying to do that. And then finally got close enough. I'm like, FBI, why are you pulling me over? And he just like, red, blue lights, out of state tag. I'm like, yeah, FBI, what don't you get? And again, I was kind of pissed. So I said, I'm leaving. I got to go. And he's trying to tell me no. And I'm like, done deal. I'm out. So I get back in my car, and I didn't mean to do this part. And I didn't realize at a time where I pulled over, I was off the pavement. So when I stepped on the gas, I was kind of in gravel, and I sprayed gravel up on his hood, which I didn't mean to. And then I'm like, So I ended up thinking I better call the barracks. State troopers, their officers are called barracks. So I end up calling the, pound something to call state police. And I asked for the barracks closest to me, identified myself as FBI. I get the first sergeant on the phone, and I said, hey, look, give my name, FBI. I said, I'm out of the hostage rescue team. I'm driving north on 17. I just got pulled over by one of your troopers. I can't explain where I'm going, but it's a code 3, which means lights and sirens. And I said, and I accidentally sprayed gravel. And he goes, oh, Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I said, when I come back from this, I don't know when it will be. I said, but I can stop by and apologize. And he's like, no, that probably won't be a good idea. I'll take care of it. So I probably should have called the troopers beforehand and said, hey, this is my route from where I lived up to Virginia Beach. And I'm going to be in a, tan Tahoe going code 3 so that they had alert. But I didn't think of it.
Lesson learned.
Yeah. And I'm literally looking at my watch because now I want to make it, because since I said I could make it in 3 hours, I wanted to make it in 3 hours. And sure enough, I think it was like from the second I left my house to the time I pulled into this secured compound was like literally within 1 or 2 minutes of 3 hours. So I get in there and Dale's about an hour out, and I'm now talking to Mitch and a couple of other ones, and they're getting ready to send out the alert squadron to fly out on C-17. And they have it so that me and Dale are going to go with them. Now the plan was they're going to jump out of the aircraft with their boats in the middle of the ocean and link up with the aircraft carrier. And they are going to what we call in military freefall tandem me and Dale in, which means they're going to have a guy jumping and we're going to be strapped to him. It's done a lot. Later on, HRT ended up sending guys to military freefall so that we could jump on our own and we didn't have to be attached to somebody, because it's definitely more difficult that way. But that was a plan. So me and Dale were going to tandem into the ocean with them. You jump into the water. The boats go first. You jump into the water. You take off your parachute and stuff, and then you swim over to the boats, and then you drive to the big aircraft carrier. And then at the last second, one of the tandem guys, the guys who's qualified to carry somebody, falls out. So they're like, all right, they asked me, who's more important to go with the assault crew? And I said, well, that's Dale. I said, he's going to be the active negotiator. I said, so I signed him up to jump into the water. And they're like, okay, we'll fly. You're going to be on the second C-17. You're going to fly and land in Djibouti. And then we're going to fly you from Djibouti. You're going to take out your 2 FBI guys that you're going to meet there. We're going to fly you out to the aircraft carrier on a different plane. I said, all right, roger that. So jump in the air, C-17. It's a probably 17-hour flight. You don't land anywhere. They fuel you in the air. You break out your sleeping pad. You're sleeping on the floor, under vehicles, next to boats or whatever's going on, wherever you can get your sleep. They keep sending intel into the planes. The planes have all the computer systems up and running. So we're getting intel that it's about 19 pirates, that the location of the craft. It's now surrounded by Navy ships. The aircraft carrier because it's so big, was a bit back, but the pirate boat now is surrounded by U.S. Navy ships, like 7 of them. So 17 hours kind of goes by somewhat quick, and they jump out into the ocean, and I fly and land in Djibouti. And Brian and Rob, Brian the HRT guy, Rob the fly team guy, are waiting for me. So get down on the ground. I know a bunch of the SEALs there that are there already. We're talking, and basically there's an aircraft that lands supplies and people on aircraft carriers. It's not a jet. It's a turboprop. So they're like, hey, we're going to fly you over to Oman, and then the shuttlecraft is going to land in Oman, pick you up, and fly you out to the aircraft carrier to meet up with the SEAL assault unit. I said, okay. The SEALs already had a couple of their leaders on destroyer. It was called the Sterret is the name of the ship. So Navy destroyer was the closest to the Quest. It was very right off its side.
We never said the name of the private vessel, so it was called the Quest.
The Quest, SV Quest, Sailing Vessel Quest, Quest. Again, about 51-foot sailboat. So the Navy command is on the Sterret, and then the assault guys with their boats are on the aircraft carrier, which is a little bit ways back from the Quest. The plan is fly over to Oman and then fly over to the aircraft carrier. And with us was some Army PSYOPs guys. So they're psychological operations guys. And, they're not as familiar with hostage stuff, but they had speakers to play loud music and, just PSYOPs things in general. So they came with us. And we fly to Oman. I forget what kind of plane we even got to go to Oman. And we're sitting there waiting for 2 of these cargo passenger planes to come in and get us. And then they find out that there's only one coming in, and it's the last one that's going to go back to the aircraft carrier, because aircraft carrier is moving so fast, it's going to be out of range of the plane to come back and get a second trip. So they actually load the PSYOPs guys on board. And me, Rob, and Brian are standing there, and we're going to be left in Oman, which was not great, because when you're going somewhere in a hurry, they get you there. But when you don't have a hurry to get back, we could have been there a little while. But thinking about this, I had talked to Mitch and the commanding officer of the SEAL unit before I left, and they very much understood that this is not a terrorism case. This was a piracy case, and that most likely anyone we capture is going to come back to the U.S. to be prosecuted. So it was, and I explained to him how when they take over this sailboat in an assault, that Brian, being the HRT guy, is going to be on the end of their assault line. And then as soon as he's on, this is a crime scene, and Brian will secure the crime scene, that it's not the military's anymore. We'll allow him to take some pictures and stuff, but all the weapons and everything else on that crime scene belongs to FBI. Brian and Rob will take control of it. So they agreed. And this is kind of one of a first for that. So in that whole thing, I said, I said, if me, Brian, and Rob don't get there, that whole thing's going to go away. I'm not sure what to do. And I had cell phone or a sat phone. I had both. And I call the SEAL unit, like on a regular commercial line. And I know I can't, talk too much because it's classified, but I asked the duty NCO to get Pete, who's the commanding officer. I said, hey, you got to get Pete on the phone. And he's kind of like, I said, just tell him FBI Rob is calling and this is a 911 call. So he definitely had no clue what was going on, but he did it. And sure enough, Pete gets on the phone. I said, hey, Pete, it's Rob. I said, I'm in here waiting for this. And they put the PsyOps guys on. I said, and FBI has no room, so they're leaving us here. If that's good with you, then fine. But if it's not, if what we talked about beforehand with crime scene, if that's what you want, you're going to need to call the aircraft carrier, to call the pilots, to tell them PsyOps guys off, FBI on. And literally the plane propellers are spinning. And he goes, Roger that. And sure enough, the plane starts to taxi. And I said, I guess that's not happening. We're standing on the tarmac, and all of a sudden the plane stops taxiing and turns around and comes back. You load the plane from the back, and the doors open, and they start throwing bags off, and they're like, you three, get on, and then push the other guys off. They were not happy. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, this is like a movie. You had to explain to people who the PsyOps guys are, though, because again, acronyms.
Yeah, the psychological ops guys, it was a sergeant or someone, a couple sergeants. I think there's three of them. And they were mad because, they thought they were going out for this big thing, and they got turned around and told to get off the ship.
What role would they have played?
Well, like I said, PsyOps is different in the military form, but they thought about having speakers to play loud music so that the pirates couldn't sleep. It wasn't really formulated for this type of thing. It was just that's what they thought. And the commander, wanted FBI to be able to take possession of the crime scene. So he thought that was more important and made that decision, which in the long run was a good one because of what happened. So they literally, as we're getting strapped in, one of the guys comes up and was just cussing at me like, you can't, I know what you did and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, look, I just said, hey, there's a lot more going on than you know about. Nothing personal, but it is what it is. And this is the commander's intent. So we end up flying to the aircraft carrier. I forget, it's probably like a 2-hour flight. And then we land on that, meet up with the SEALs that are on that one. And then the three of us, they're going to fly us in a helicopter from the aircraft carrier over to the Sterret. They want us on that ship since it's right next to the sailboat. The SEAL commander's on there and a couple of his guys are on the Sterret. The other thing that happened, while we were en route in the flight, the pirates had a person that they sent over to negotiate. JSOC commander, Admiral McCraven, they were trying to negotiate with the pirates. We'll talk about later why it wasn't really working, but they sent one of the 19 over to the Sterret to talk to the Navy guys, but be it the SEALs, and I think there was like a security guy on there, almost like a Navy MP, and they were trying to talk to him about releasing the hostages and everything else. And the guy just kept saying, like, no, we're going to Somalia. And the military didn't like that he wasn't playing ball. He wasn't negotiating anything. So they actually detained him. They didn't let him go back to the sailboat, which turned out to be very traumatic for the pirates because they thought maybe the Americans killed him. They didn't know what happened to him. They just knew he was supposed to be back by, dark, and he wasn't. So he's on the Sterret. They have him in a room being detained. So when I get there, I brief up the captain of the ship, the SEAL commander, who I knew very well anyhow. We start talking, and the plan was to have Rob and Brian, the FBI guys that were with me, go down in the morning and start talking to the negotiator, this guy they sent over to negotiate. So sure enough, we didn't get any sleep. It was late when we got there, but we're coming up with a plan, what we're going to do the next day. Dale, the negotiator, was on board, and we had a translator who spoke Somali. So we're talking to them about how we're going to like lean over the ship with the loudspeaker and try to talk to the pirates. While we're doing that, though, the SEALs from the aircraft carrier are going to be in their assault boats on the other side of the sterret so that the pirates can't see them. But they're there for like an emergency assault. So if something bad happens, they're very close to try to get on the sailboat to do the hostage rescue. Same thing as you saw in like FBI, where you have negotiations going on with the barricaded subject. You have one part of the SWAT teams on emergency assault. If shooting starts happening, they can quickly respond and try to get in there and save people. So sure enough, in the morning, Rob and Brian go down and talk to this pirate that's on the sterret. The two SEAL assault boats are on the starboard side, the right side of the destroyer. But what ends up coming down from JSOC is that the sterret is not going to allow the sailboat to keep going towards Somalia, because right now it's probably making 5 to 7 knots. It's using its motor to go forward to Somalia. And Admiral McRaven did not want that sailboat getting closer to Somalia, because once it gets into Somalia waters and they have whole crews that detain the hostages and bring them into land, the rescue efforts are not very good and it can go on years. So Admiral McRaven does not want to let that sailboat get to Somalia. On the sterret, it's called shouldering. It's a naval term where a bigger boat gets on the side of you and basically just kind of like leans into you so you can't go on the course you want to. Sometimes contact's made, but it's called shouldering. And basically the bigger ship shoulders the little ship so that it can't go on the course it wants. So that's what the plan is. We figure out like, hey, we better let these guys know that we're not ramming them. We're just not letting them go. Let's see, what is that? We're not letting them go west towards Somalia. So Dale tells the translator, okay, this is what you're going to say. This is a peaceful maneuver. We're just shouldering your boat so you can't go west type of thing in Somalia. He's talking to him. And we're on the command center where you drive the ship. The combat operations center is in the center of the ship and it's protected. It's like there's no windows. This is where you actually are above the ship and you're looking out, and the captain can walk both sides and see both sides of the ship, and the steering wheel, or whatever you call it on a Navy. I was a Marine, so I'm not sure some naval terms. So this is the command center there. And we're standing on one side of it, outside of the ship. We're standing on a viewing area, leaning over, and the Quest sailboat's literally 30, 40 feet below us. And we're only a few feet from it. And we're telling them on the bullhorn that we're shouldering them. It's a peaceful maneuver. We're not going to ram them. We're not going to board them. We're just not allowing them to keep going west. And at one point, one of the guys, and we saw, he comes to the back of the Quest, the sailboat, and he pulls up an RPG and he launches it at us, literally. Like,
that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about it later. And it literally just goes over our heads. And all the sailors just dive to the floor. The SEAL commander and I kind of look at each other. We've been, shot at by RPGs before. We knew it was like going well above us. And it did. It flew over the sterret, but we hadn't got word to the SEALs that are sitting on the assault boats over there that they just fired an RPG. They heard something, and then all of a sudden RPG lands in the water. So they get a little bit ramped up. And then, there's a lot of yelling from the sailboat up to us. We have, I think, 3 or 4 SEAL snipers that are trying to figure out where the hostages are. And the center of the sailboat had like a sunscreen above it. That's where the steering wheel is. And there's like a steering wheel, all the controls, and then like a U-shaped padded seats that are on a boat around that steering wheel. Unbeknownst to us, that's where the 4 Americans were sitting. And amongst the 4 Americans were 2 pirates that were guarding them. And then like a bunch of we can hear arguing and yelling. And then all of a sudden, just gunfire, AK-47 fire. And we're looking over at it. It's like 30 feet away. The snipers can't figure out who they're shooting at. They're not shooting at us in the command tower, but some of the windows are being blown out. At that point, the SEAL commander calls emergency execute. So the SEALs and the 2 assault craft drop back and come around to the back end of the Quest. They basically run these assault craft up onto the back of the sailboat, and the SEALs run off the front of their assault craft onto the sailboat. And we're watching this from 30 feet away above them. Like we're up probably maybe 2 or 3 stories above it. So I'm watching this go down. The SEALs get on board. I think it was like the second SEAL or second or third SEAL gets on, and I see a pirate jump on his back. And then I see the SEAL behind him, like literally is going to go shoot him, and then figures like, well, if I shoot this guy, it's going to go right through him into his buddy. And he holsters his pistol and he ends up taking that pirate out with a knife. And it was brutal. And then the rest of the SEALs get on board. And then at that point, you see...
Is there gunfire at this time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, once they started shooting, when the SEALs weren't on board, the SEALs got on board, more gunfire. And then all of a sudden, the front of the Quest, there's a hatch that goes down into the living area. That hatch opens and a bunch of the pirates start climbing out onto the front of the sailboat because the SEALs are coming in from the back. So basically, they're trying to get away from the SEALs coming on board, and they get onto the front of the sailboat. Now, most of them just immediately just put their arms in the air because now, at this point, all the Navy ships start getting closer, and then the helicopters start coming over from the aircraft carrier. As the SEALs are on board, I can hear, the traffic on the radio, and I start hearing the friendlies are down. So there's code words I won't go into here, but distinguish a friendly from a foe. And then I start hearing the call medical, surgery, urgent, which is not good in combat. When you hear, urgent surgery call, that means someone needs to get into surgery absolutely right away. And it's not good. And then I hear a second urgent surgery, and then a third, and then a fourth. So in a matter of a few minutes, I know that there's 4 urgent surgeries, and you don't call this urgent surgery for a pirate. Like, I know that's the Americans or a SEAL was hit. I wasn't sure at that point. Then I they start bringing the victims who were shot. And it turns out all 4 of the American citizens on there were shot. And none of the SEALs were shot. So none of the surgeries were for them. And the medics are on board. By now, Brian and Rob came up on the end of the assault and are on board. And I just gave them instructions, just preserve as much of the crime scene as you can, as things are going on. All the pirates are giving up. So they're all getting flex cuffed. Later, we'll talk about it. There's 4 dead pirates on the Quest. The rest of them are all on the front of the ship, hands up, and the SEALs are zip tying them behind their back. And then the medical people are treating the Americans. And they're trying to land the helicopters, and the helicopters are just throwing up so much water onto the sailboat, is causing a bunch of confusion. They decide to put the American victims on to the salt craft, on the front of the salt craft, drive a couple hundred yards away from the sailboat, and then the helicopter was sending the medical trays down to pick them up, and they brought them back. There's an entire surgery wing on an aircraft carrier. And JSOC had brought out a bunch of trauma, very, very good trauma surgeons, and they were all set up waiting for them. And then at that point, all 4 Americans are evacuated to the aircraft carrier, and the SEALs start bringing the pirates over. The aircraft carrier also has basically a jail, and they've set up a receiving area in the hangar of the aircraft carrier because now we have 15 pirates that are flex cuffed. The SEALs bring them over, and now on the Quest and it's all shot up and pretty, the steering wheel's off and it's not, the motor's not functioning anymore, is Rob and Brian and the 4 dead pirates. So I tell Rob and Brian, say, look, I'm going to try to get approval from headquarters that we can process the dead pirates, and then we can try to tow the sailboat back with us. I've already been talking to the Navy folks about towing it back to Djibouti as a crime scene. So I tell Rob and Brian, hey, look, as far as the crime scene goes, if something looks like it's going to fall overboard, take a picture of it as it lays and then slide it back so it doesn't have the possibility of falling into ocean. Otherwise, there's no sense of it falling over, then don't touch it. Just leave it. Because I knew that we were looking at having an evidence response team come out from New York to process this. We've done that before. So I told them, it's going to fall over, take a picture, pull it back in, otherwise leave it. So they're sitting on this, sailboat that's floating. And we kind of lost track of exactly where it was because everyone else is now trying to deal with the pirates and the injuries. And the sailboat's just kind of floating in the ocean with Rob and Brian on it. And it's hot. And they're sitting up on top of that sun deck where we couldn't see the steering vessel because, again, they didn't want to get into the middle of the crime scene until we figured out what we were doing. I start getting word that one of the victims died, second one died, and it turns out all 4 of them were killed.
Where are the bodies of the dead Somali pirates?
They're still on board the sailboat with Rob and Brian.
Are they on deck or are they under?
Later, we found out that 2 of the pirates did the shooting, and they shot and killed the 2 pirates that were guarding the Americans. They shot all the Americans and the 2 pirates because, as we said, they weren't from the same pirate crew. And these 2, that did the shooting, they're the ones that fired the RPG, and they thought if they killed the Americans, the Navy boats would go away because the Navy was there for the Americans. So if they kill them, we'll go away. Obviously, a bit of flawed thinking. They weren't friendly with other pirates. Like I said, there was 4 different like pirate crews on there, and so they killed 2 of their own. Those 2 that were shooting, the SEALs killed both of them as they got on board, because they got on board from the back. Those 2 were down below. The stairwell goes down, the ladder well goes down in the front of the steering compartment to the sleeping quarters. And that's where they were shooting from. So as the SEALs came on, they started taking fire from them. The SEALs killed the one guy at the bottom, and then the other guy that jumped on him, the one SEAL with the knife, and he killed him with the knife. So though all 4 of them are still on the sailboat. So as this is going down, I'm just answering all kinds of radio traffic from FBI headquarters and JSOC, and everyone's trying to figure out things. Now, all the SEALs, they're there to do the rescue. It didn't go well. So they all went back to the aircraft carrier. And it's just me and Dale, the negotiator, with the regular Navy crew on the Sterret. And the SEALs went back to the aircraft carrier. We're getting word about them, what's going on with the pirates, that they're, detaining them. They're doing, in processing and stuff.
The SEALs took the pirates with them?
Yeah, the 15 pirates that were flex cuffed went back to the aircraft carrier. Now, the SEALs were giving them over to, the whole security detachment on the aircraft carrier, military MPs basically. And now they're in processing the SEALs, trying to get names, take pictures of them. And they have certain detention areas for them that they're doing. Basically, I told them later I'm going to send FBI guys over to start interviewing them. I finally get word, though, about 8 or 9 hours after this happened from headquarters that we can now take the sailboat, the Quest, and remove the dead pirates from it, rig it for tow so that we can try to tow it behind the Navy ship that we're on back to Djibouti. Myself and Dale get in a small Navy boat called a RIB, a rigid hull inflatable boat. Probably got like a 220 horsepower engine on it. It's made to dock against, smaller ships and stuff. So they're going to take us over. We figured out where the Quest was floating. They take us over to it. Rob and Brian already on it, been on it all day in the sun. And then me and Dale arrive. And then there's 4 Navy guys that are going to help us. So we have to remove the bodies, though, like in an evidence way. So we have to photograph them as they lie. And then as they're lying, one of us has to kind of roll them over, because a couple of them were laying on weapons, and it was important that their body positions was on top of guns that they had. So, we're rolling them over as the other guy photographs. But the thing that happened was, in the morning, it was nice and calm. And now there's like 6-foot seas. We're doing this crime scene on a small sailboat in 6-foot seas. And a couple of the pirates had been hit in the head. Frankly, like if you see a victim like that, a lot of the stuff that's in the head comes out, and it is slippery as you can't believe. So the boat is nothing but blood and brains, and it's in 6-foot seas. We're doing this, and because we're agents, and most of us had a lot of overseas time, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is 2011. We've been going over there for years. You kind of, as you know, get black humor in law enforcement because you see some horrible stuff. We're using our black humor because this is it is literally sliding around in all this, trying to process the crime scene. The Navy guys are not used to this, and they weren't doing too good. And they were like 3 of them were really young guys. The senior bosun's mate who was going to rig it for tow, he was a senior guy. He wasn't phased much, but the young kids were. I mean, it was a bad crime scene. We're bagging them up. We have the body bag. So as we photograph them and move them, we put them in a body bag, and we got to get them onto the little Navy ship, the Navy boat, the RIB. The first one we're trying to hand over, and because the seas were so rough, 2 of us almost fell in the water. One of the Navy guys almost fell in, and Rob or Brian almost fell in. So I said, all right, look, no, it's not worth going in the water. We're just going to chuck the body bag over to your boat. So the 4 of us are on there, and we, 2 on each side, and we go back, and we're like, all right, 1, 2, 3. And we pitched that thing a little too hard, the first one, because the body bag flies over, it hits the center console to the RIB, makes a loud noise, and then falls down.
Thank goodness.
We were making jokes about the, calibration of a pirate launching and everything else, just again, because you got to laugh to get through this stuff. The guy who was on the bottom of the berthing area, he was a fat pirate. Like I'm like, who knew pirates were fat? This guy was, and he was all the way at the bottom. So we had to process him down there, and he was lying on like 2 different guns. And then we had to bring him up the stairs and over, and then chuck him. And then the last guy we processed, because I was kind of like, I wonder which one's the knife victim. And the last guy, I'm on the back of the Sterret, and I'm leaning, I grab him, the body by the hair and the hip to roll him so that we could photograph from inside the boat what's under him. And literally his head just about comes off. That SEAL who killed him with the knife, it was something. So we
Almost decapitated him.
it literally, like, it was only a
Wow.
little bit of flesh on there. And I'm like, wow, that was definitely something. So we processed him, get him in a body bag, and we put it on the little boat. And then we rigged the Quest to be towed behind the Sterret. The senior Navy bosun's guy, he had this big rope and how he was going to rig it to tow it. Sure enough, we get it ready for tow. I think we almost went underwater on the one boat. There was some really crazy dynamic because now it's about 11 p.m. So it's pitch black out. We're doing weird things around big Navy ships and stuff that's normally not done. A couple times that we went under things, I wasn't sure we were going to come back up, but we end up getting the Quest tied to the Sterret. And the bosun's mate, though, looks at me, he's like, hey, boss, that ain't going to hold long. I did the best I could, but I just don't see it holding even through the night. I'm like, really? He's like, no, I don't. He goes, we'll try it. I was like, okay. So we get back onto the Sterret. There's probably about 100 yards of rope dragging the Quest.
Yeah, the one thing you don't want to do is lose your crime scene in the middle of the ocean.
So the other thing, though, is I'm like, hey, look, I have to kind of testify that no one got on that crime scene while we're towing it. And the Navy captain's like, really? I'm like, yeah, that's going to be, if they challenge something. He said, okay, so the back of the Sterret had these big lights on it, and they put a Navy sentry, like one of the MP guys, to stand on the back of the Sterret and watch the Quest being towed with these big lights. And I told him, I said, if anything comes up to the sailboat while we're towing, call back up to the command center and have them call me, and then I'll come out. So he's like, roger that. So I have my crime scene being towed, lights on it, someone watching it. And then I go and find Brian. And I said, hey, don't get too comfortable. Have your kit ready, because the bosun's mate told me that sailboat's not holding up through the night. He's like, really? I'm like, nope. I said, so be ready to go, because you're the one getting on it. He's like, all right, go into the galley. They got some food for us because it's been a long day. It's probably now about 1 a.m. Talking to the captain of the ship. And again, all the SEALs are gone now. They're all on the aircraft carrier, telling, captain of the ship kind of what I want. Sure enough, get word coming through the command center for the captain and FBI to, up the command center, and the tow, it broke. So basically it's the middle of the night. The boat's now just drifting at sea because the rope broke. So the plan is to get 2 Navy guys that can try to fix the sailboat so it can use its motors. And I'm putting Brian with them onto the floating sailboat. During the night there, Rob, we got transferred over to the aircraft carrier to start trying to talk to the pirates that were detained. So Brian, we get him, he's got his kit on. So he's in his cami, his tactical gear, his night vision goggles, his M4 rifle, and he gets on the Quest with the Navy guys that are going to try to make it work. And it, like I said, it was shot up, fuel wasn't flowing and stuff like that. So they get the motor working, and they're doing it on flashlight in the ocean, with waves and stuff. And again, it's still not a clean crime scene. It is nasty. And the steering wheel had come off during the firefight. I guess there's only one kind of special nut that holds that steering wheel on, and they're trying to find it because they have to be able to steer this thing. And sure enough, the Navy guy goes, oh, there it is. And he points his flashlight, and Brian looks, and there's a piece of skull there with a bunch of stuff in it. And in the middle of it is this special nut. And
oh my goodness.
The Navy guy just walks over, no gloves, and he picks it up, pours some water on it, and goes, oh, here it is. And he screws on the steering wheel, and they get this boat going. It was doing maybe 5-6 knots. So now the Quest is on its own. They rigged up an autopilot somehow, like tying the steering wheel to the thing. Navy guys do what Navy guys do. And they're not sitting in the cockpit area of the sailboat, because that's where the majority of the crime was committed. And all the brains and blood are in there too. So they're sitting on top of the sunshade thing above it. And one, they don't want to be in that mess, and they don't want to be in the crime scene. So they just sit on top and they start sailing. They're surrounded by Navy ships. I think there's still 5 of the Navy ships around it. So, and we're probably 100, 200 yards or meters off each side of it as it's going. And we're, going very slow, but we're going. And I'm now between talking to headquarters, I think we're 6, 7, 8 hours ahead of time. So, as you know, when DC wakes up, everyone's in a panic to find out what's going on, and they have communications with the ship. And I'm running between the command tower where you steer the boat, where the unclassified comms is, down to the combat operations center where the classified comms are, because some would call me on classified systems and some would call me on unclass. They're calling me FBI Rob as I'm running around the ship. I mean, running around all day, all night. It takes us, I think, 3.5, 4 days to get all the way back. And at one point, I get called
all the way back to Djibouti.
So now it's down to just the Sterret and the sailboat. The other Navy ships have left. But at one point, I forget what day it was, I get called by Jim Yacone, who's at the time was the HRT commander, and he was a new agent class of mine. Good friends the entire time we were in the bureau. And he's like, hey, Rob, he goes, I got to ask you, like, where's Brian and the Quest? And I said, they're like right off our starboard side. He goes, are you sure? And I'm like, Jim, I'm looking at him right now. Like, yeah. He goes, someone called FBI headquarters and told the director that Brian is sailing the Quest back on his own with no Navy ships around them. And I'm like, what? What idiot? But you know how rumors, go around the bureau.
Right.
And I'm like, look, I said, I swear he is literally, I can see him. And I said, hold on. And I get on the radio. We have a walkie-talkie to him. I'm like, Brian, tell Jim that you're fine and that you're not alone on the Quest sailing it back yourself. And he just starts laughing. He goes, are you serious? I'm like, Brian, tell Jim. And sure enough, he does. Jim's like, okay. I find out later who did tell him, the director, that. But so we end up sailing this back. We actually passed the Maersk, Alabama on the way in to the harbor at Djibouti.
Tell everybody what the...
So the Maersk, Alabama is the movie that he talked about with Tom Hanks on when the Somali pirates, pirated that one and they got away in the lifeboat type of thing, and the two snipers shot him, SEAL snipers shot him. So it was kind of just a year before, I think, is when that event happened with pirates. Now that boat was getting fixed in the harbor in Djibouti, and we passed right by it. Small world, so to speak, but all in this land of pirates. We pull in, and I knew at this point that we had teams coming in from New York. So team of investigators that work piracy, and then an evidence response team. It was like 3 people that ended up going down to 2, worked the Quest as a, process as a true crime scene. The Quest is tied to the Sterret in port. It was a regular civilian port, so it wasn't a military port. To keep the Quest safe, they put it on the outside of the Sterret, tied there. But the evidence response team literally had to be lowered by rope down to the Quest, and they had to be in Tyvek suits to process it because all the blood. It's hot. Brian ends up just feeling bad. Kate Kelly is the ERT team leader. Phenomenal. I actually had her on my podcast talking about just the crime scene we talked about for an hour and a half. And it was like something that she'd seen some bad crime scenes, but this one was pretty bad. And she was thinking it was going to be like a small job and not understanding that a 51-foot sailboat has it's like a 3-bedroom apartment. And it was really hard to move around. But Brian, even though he was an HRT operator, basically knew like, hey, to get this thing done, because the Sterret's not going to stay in port long. We got to get this done quick. He said, hey, I got nothing going on. I'll help out. So he put on the Tyvek suit, helped Kate out. One of the ERT guys had to go out on another ship looking for that original Yemeni fishing vessel. I don't even know what happened to him later on. I don't think they ever found that boat. So while we're doing that, though, I end up getting, when we're sailing in, I get some word that there's a guy that was doing some covert things, a military guy doing some covert things in Somalia that had some info for me. And what ended up happening was when we were talking to the, quote, negotiator, he handed a cell phone number, say, call this guy for negotiations. And that's where, if we understood that how they do it is the lead warlord that is in charge of this pirate crew has his own negotiator. So he gets to use his negotiator trying to get as much money. And they were basically giving us his cell phone number for us to call him to negotiate the ransom on the sailboat. Well, when they all got killed, we kind of forgot that we had gotten that because we passed that number back to JSOC saying, hey, this is a cell phone number they're saying for us to call. While we're doing this, bringing the sailboat back, JSOC started doing what they do. They mostly find, terrorists. So they start doing all kinds of the crazy stuff that they do. And they come across where this guy's at in Somalia. And they basically have a team doing some things that we can't mention inside Somalia, and they're close to where this guy's at. They're working with Somali forces looking for al-Shabaab terrorists. So they take a break from doing that, and they basically bring this guy, Rich, over, who's the commander of the small unit. They find the phone. It's at a hotel in Galkayo. Rich, being a white soldier, he can't get out of that vehicle in Galkayo. Galkayo is like the Wild West in Somalia. It's a crazy bad place. So the Puntland forces say, hey, look, we're going to go talk to him. We know who it is. is. They actually knew the guy. We're going to go talk to him and you stay in the vehicle and we're going to get his phone.
At this point, do you think he knows what happened? Because I would imagine there wasn't enough time for the pirates to call him.
Yeah, he heard because it was out on the news that what happened. Probably a day or two after all the killing went on. We're sailing the quest back, and this is going on unbeknownst to me. So they go up to him and they're Al-Shabaab hunters. So they accuse him of being Al-Shabaab. He says, I'm not Al-Shabaab. I'm a pirate. He goes, here's my phone. It proves I'm not Al-Shabaab, because they know that the phone would be connected to Al-Shabaab. So he literally gives them his phone. They take it and they end up giving it to Rich. Now, Rich has some very technical things with him to basically download that phone in a second or two, but he has none of those things with him when he's out here. He was doing another type of job. So he goes back to the American little compound that they have, and he takes 350 pictures of every screenshot, every contact, every email, every text message that this guy has. 350 pictures. I mean, it was an unbelievable job that he did, but he does that. They actually give the phone back to the Puntland security force they're working with, and they return it to this guy, what we call his last name, Shibin, Mohammed Shibin. So Shibin gets his phone back, says, see, I told you I wasn't Al-Shabaab. And they're like, yeah, you're not Al-Shabaab. So Rich now has all these pictures and he starts looking through them because some of them are in English. And it's this guy, Shibin, looking up how much is this Quest sailboat worth? Who owns it? And then he's looking for phone numbers to call the owners of the sailboat in California to start negotiating a ransom. So Rich, he's not an investigator, but he's a smart guy. Says, wait a second, this is like evidence this guy was involved. He tells JSOC headquarters that he's got this stuff. And they're like, hey, look, you got to go find Rob. Rob's coming into Djibouti. He's going to be with the SEAL unit there when he gets there. Get up to Djibouti, find Rob. We'll try to tell him what you got. So I was getting some odd communications on the stereo when we're taking it back, that there's this guy that they got with the phone and he's got a bunch of evidence on it. And I really didn't have my head around exactly what this was, but I knew that when I got to Djibouti, I was going to get off the ship and meet Rich. So sure enough, I radio in, I'm like, hey, I'm getting off the ship. A car comes, picks me up, and it's this guy, Rich. And he starts telling me the story, which then it made sense. And he's got all the 350 pictures on CD-ROM. So we go back to the special military compound. I start pulling them up. I'm like, holy cow, this is evidence. It's evidence that this guy was involved in this crime as the negotiator. At that point, I start working with JSOC and saying, hey, where is this guy now? So I'm starting to do that. We end up like the New York teams interviewing the pirates they're all still out on the aircraft carrier. We're going to do an FTOC, which is a foreign transfer of custody, which means we're going to take all these pirates, medically process them, get them on a big C-17 airplane, Air Force airplane, and fly them back to the States to be prosecuted because they're all involved in the killing of 4 Americans. They're doing all the legal paperwork, doing the indictments through New York. And then I start talking to them about this Shibin guy that we didn't catch, that was on land, that was involved in it. So we end up doing like VTCs with the prosecuting team, the assistant U.S. attorney teams actually out of Norfolk. It's a very Navy town, and it's one that you want to, if you're going to prosecute piracy, that's where you want to do it. But the investigative team was out of New York because they covered Africa. We were doing all these secure VTCs where basically I had the military translators translating the messages that were in different languages. Some of them were in English. We were putting it on a spreadsheet, going through all this. And then at that point, they basically said they had enough to indict him. They had enough that they could indict him. I'm like, oh, that's great. At that point, the quest is done being processed for a crime scene. Kate has just a ton of evidence to get back, like a ton. She's not going to take the boat, but everything that's on it, she's got to get back. We got to fly the pirates back. Ends up the SEALs are just now getting ready to leave. They all got off the aircraft carrier. They're in Djibouti and they're going to fly back to Virginia Beach. And I'm like, hey, can you guys take Kate with all the evidence? They're like, sure. So on that flight, all the SEALs are going to go back to Virginia Beach, and Kate Kelly and the evidence are going to go back with the SEALs. New York is going to fly in about half their SWAT team. We're only allowed to keep pirates in Djibouti on the ground for 2 hours. The ambassador got 2-hour transfer time. So what we end up have to do is get the pirates off the aircraft carrier into Djibouti, process medically onto an aircraft plane, and then that plane has to be wheels up with those pirates no less than 2 hours on the ground.
Wow.
It's a big process. So they end up sending out another HRT guy, Lance Keppel, to facilitate that because he's done them before. New York SWAT is on the ground, and they're going to basically guard and process these guys into the C-17 and then fly back to Oceana, to Norfolk. As that's going on, I'm still working with trying to find Shibin. And sure enough, the plane comes in with the New York SWAT guys. All the pirates come in from the aircraft carrier, and it's like clockwork. We went through rehearsals the day before, and we end up taking all the pirates in because you do have to medically process them to make sure that they're okay and it's not going to be blamed on us. So they process them in medically. They have all this, the C-17 set up for them to be like sit on the floor of the plane, shackles, waist handcuffs and shackles. They process them in, and sure enough, 90 minutes later, that plane takes off. One pirate we did not bring back with us because we found out, I think he was like 14. So being a juvenile, they didn't want to go through that. So I think it was 14 pirates in total got flown back to the U.S. to be prosecuted. All the New York SWAT went with it. Kate's gone with the SEALs, and Lance Keppel's still there. And now I'm starting to get involved in the manhunt for the Shibin guy. I called back to HRT and said, hey, can I keep Lance out here? I need another guy to help. And they said, sure. Because Rob from the fly team, since he was really out there on a counterterrorism mission, they asked for him to go back to Nairobi to do what he originally was doing. So now it's just Lance, Brian, and me, the 3 HRT guys with the SEALs. And we now start working and trying to find them. We find them back in Somalia. There's another team from JSOC that's working in there with some local forces looking for Al-Shabaab. So we start talking to them about the arrest plan of Shibin. So we're going to go in. The plan is we're going to go in, me, Lance, and Brian. We're going to find them, and then we're going to go in and arrest them. In it, it was getting very confusing because the military guys that are on the ground are like, well, you can't just go up to a building in Somalia being who we are and arrest someone. It's not going to happen. We start bringing the U.S. attorneys on to talk to them about how we can do it to preserve evidence, but not get in a big shootout in Somalia. The plan was that Shibin is still at this hotel, that the Puntland, the Somali forces, are going to go back up to the hotel like they did the first time. They're going to call Mr. Shibin out from his room, and they're going to walk him directly to the vehicle I'm in and have his phone where I can take the phone off him for evidence purposes. So they're going to walk him directly from the hotel room with his luggage to where I'm at in a vehicle so no one can see me. And then he's going to have his phone on, and I can testify that I took the phone off him. The military guy said he could do that. The prosecutor said, yeah, we can go to court with that. That'll work. So that was the plan. Now, this plan has to go up to the White House to get approved because you're basically going to put 3 FBI agents into Somalia with a bunch of covert military folks with another country to grab a pirate. Eventually it gets approved. But as soon as it gets approved, they're like, he's gone. We're like, what do you mean he's gone? They're like, he's not in Somalia anymore.
What? Wasn't somebody watching him?
They kind of were, but it's tough. I mean, it's Somalia, and the way we were tracking him, we really can't get into, but yeah, he ended up sliding out of Somalia. So we're like, crap. Now this is going on like 2-3 weeks, maybe longer.
Wait a minute. So you went to get pizza with your son, got that phone call, and now you've been gone for how long?
We're probably at 3 weeks now. At that point, because I kept thinking I was going to be home the next weekend. I kept thinking this was going to happen. I'll be like, I'll be home by the weekend. Finally, my wife said, just don't tell the kids you're going to be home until you know. It's the 3 of us. We're working out on the SEAL compound. We're eating. We're doing all the, planning and assessment, doing everything that we can do. But he's gone. And people are starting to want us to come home, just give up on this. We're kind of like, no way. And then we find out that he's down in Zambia. Can't really get into how we figured that one out, but he's down in Zambia. He's got some relatives down there.
At this point, does he know that you're looking for him?
That's why he left Somalia. He started getting word that some weird things were going on, and he found out like all 4 Americans died, and there's some Americans' interest in him, and that's why he left Somalia to go down to Zambia. We're like, okay, we're also now, the case agent's up on a search warrant on his email. So we now actually have some things coming from an email that he's on. We figure out, again, he's got relatives down in Zambia, and there's 2 areas of Zambia that have a lot of Somalis. We're doing all the normal things, trying to figure out where he's at. Then me, Brian, and Lance fly down to South Africa because there was no legat in Zambia. The legat that covered that area is in Pretoria, South Africa. So we go down there to coordinate going up into Zambia. It's like a holiday. Like, this is priority for us, but no one else, it is. But I mean, they're giving us assistance, but they have regular days and jobs to do too. So we finally get up with the Legat and we make this plan to fly into Zambia. We figure out later it's a one gate airport into Zambia. We find out later though that the plane that we flew in on, Shibin flew out on. Like that was like a crazy, like, catch me if you can. So we fly in thinking he's there. We meet up with the Zambian intelligence service and we're going to go arrest him later that night. The Zambians said the same thing, like, you're white, you can't come with us. It's going to make too much problems. Well, we really need to be there. Can we wear balaclavas on our heads so we're covered? And he said, no, they see your eyes. And then he tells us he wants to wear us to do shoe polish and wear blackface. And I look over, and because we're working with the CIA station chief, and I'm like, is he telling me he wants the 3 FBI guys to do blackface to go in with him? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, that's not gonna happen. Like, I can see all the problems after. I'm like, oh my God, we're trying to negotiate how to go on target with them without doing that. And then all of a sudden the chief of station gets an emergency phone call, and then we figure out Shibin is not in Zambia anymore. So like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So we're flying out. There's only 2 flights in a week, or out a week. There's one leaving later that day. So we're hurrying, and I'm driving to the airport. I got the Legat in the car, Brian and Lance. All of a sudden, there's a cop on the side of the road with look like a radar gun that I can't believe that they have one. And he tells me to pull over. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I do it. And then he comes up to the car and I'm showing him my dip passport. And I'm like, I'm with the embassy. He goes, oh, you talked to my boss. So I'm like, okay. So I get out of the car, and the boss is sitting in the middle of this like median with the old aluminum and nylon, lounge chairs with the umbrella taped to it. And I show him my dip passport, and he goes, oh, you pay your fine now then? You want to pay your fine now? I'm like, yes. How much? And he says something, and it comes out to like $17 in US. So I pull out a US 20. I said, is this good? And it was out of my hands before I knew it. I get back in the car and I start driving. Everyone's kind of like looking at me, like waiting to hear the explanation. So finally one of them's like, well, what was that? I'm like, oh, it was a toll. And they're like, a toll? I said, yeah. I said, I can voucher a toll. I can't voucher a speeding ticket. So I'm already thinking about my FBI voucher to get repaid for that. So we get to the airport. We fly back out, losing track. This is probably another week on it because we were in South Africa almost 2 weeks. So we're probably at the 5-week point now. So we fly into Nairobi and then fly over to Djibouti. And as I'm coming up, the SEALs pick us up at the airport. We went into the civilian airport. The SEALs pick us up, and the SEAL commander is a buddy of mine. He goes, hey, I got another thing going on, and I could really use one of your guys, especially if they're free fall qualified. Because we talked about the thing, and I knew Lance was a former combat controller. Brian was a former Green Beret, and I knew they were both free fall qualified. So I said, hey, you guys are qualified, right? And they're like, yeah. Brian says, well, I'm not current though, meaning you got to be current on your jumps. Lance says, I'm current. They want to take Lance, put him in an airplane with some other SEALs and jump into the Red Sea to meet up with another ship to do other things that we can't talk about here. I look at him, I'm like, all right, Lance, you're the man. So within 20 minutes of him landing in Djibouti, he's putting on a parachute and he's getting on a plane. And he goes off and does that. So now it's just me and Brian. We're back. Finally figure out Shibin's back in Somalia, but we're trying to figure out the plan. People like State Department, there's a lot of people that just want us gone. Like we're just making problems for everyone. So we start talking to Tom, who's the special mission unit commander in Somalia, about, again, the plan to grab him. One afternoon, someone coming to my hooch says, hey, team needs to talk to you. So I run down to the command center and it's Tom. They're like, hey, we got him. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, we were driving, one of the military guys' wife needed to go into emergency surgery. So they were driving him to this dirt airport to fly him back. And as they're driving there, they look over in the T thing and they see Shibin sitting there. They confirm it's him through the Somali guys they're working with. And they're asking me, do you want to come in to do the rest? I said, no, just grab him, bring him back to the compound. We haven't seen him for a week. Just grab him. So they grab him. We get emergency authority to fly me and Brian into Somalia in a special nifty little plane. We fly in and we meet up with Tom and the team, and there's Shibin. Turns out his nephew was in the unit we're actually working with. He's sitting there smoking khat or chewing khat, which is like a narcotic drug that they chew. It's this root of something. The Somalis gave it to him, and he's sitting there and he's around a bunch of ammo and guns and stuff, and like no one's even guarding him. Like, holy cow. So we get with the Somali team. We built them like a compound that had classrooms and stuff. So we get one of the classrooms to be like a jail cell. We put blankets down. We can't talk to him. He's so messed up on cot. We're going to do it in the morning, but we put a guard on that room. And we end up going in the next morning. We have Miranda rights. We read to him. He speaks 5 languages, so he speaks English. We get him to start talking to us after signing a Miranda. His luggage isn't with him, though, and we really wanted that phone. And we find out his luggage he left out at his cousin's place. We put a team together the next morning to go out and get his luggage. And headquarters freaked out. Like, I got people yelling at me and stuff, but we really needed it.
Why were they concerned?
Because there's only like maybe 6 of us driving around Somalia looking for luggage.
Oh,
It was like me, Brian, 2 Rangers, 2 SEALs, and the Somali guys that we were working with. We didn't have an op plan. An approved op plan was some SSA in headquarters was worried about. I may have told him to F off in an email. And then he came back and added more like deputy assistant directors onto an email. And that's when I think I told him to F off. I'm like, hey, you're not here. I got to do what I got to do. We actually get his luggage. We actually find receipts from a different pirating thing with a German vessel, but the phone wasn't in there. We're talking to him. We're not dirtying him up on the American sailboat yet. We just told him we were Americans, Rob and Brian, and we had some questions for him. We built some rapport with him. We found out like where he was the whole time. It started getting dicey because the Somali commander that we were with decided he at first said he was going to turn him over to us. And then the people outside the American and Somali compound started hearing that these Americans were in there. They didn't mind piracy. So Shibin wasn't bad to him. He wasn't a terrorist. And they started kind of causing a ruckus. So now they're worried about the Somalis overrunning the base we're on. So they started putting up some predators and other stuff watching us in the crowd. And that scared the Somali commander, Tom Cool. That was his nickname. He's talking to the president of Puntland, which is like a state in Somalia, trying to figure this out. We finally get it that he agrees to turn Shibin over to the Bosaso Police Department, and the Bosaso Police Department will bring him to the airstrip that night at midnight. We get one more chance to talk to him. We get dirty on this one. We bring in pictures of the phone and all the cell phone messages and texts and stuff.
and you're talking to him now just in case they don't bring him?
Yes. Also, we had some other military guys there that did some technical stuff for something else, that thing Lance was on. So I asked him if they have a few minutes. I'd leave Shibin's shoes outside, and I told those guys to put a GPS tracker in his shoe, because if he doesn't show up at the airport, we're going to go drive and find him. I'm not leaving without him. State Department was telling us, no matter what, if he shows or not, you're gone. You're getting on that plane. So I'm like, I'm not going without him. So they put a tracker in his shoe while we're talking to him. Since we don't have the phone, and that's really where the evidence was, we have like basically a photo lineup of phones, and he picks his out and he says that's his. And we get him to sign the document saying that's his phone. We put several pictures of text Google searches and text messages that he sent back and forth that incriminate him. We said, look, with that phone, did you in fact send these messages? And he said, yes. So he signed those documents. We did the next best thing about having the phone. We have him sign documents saying that that was his phone and he sent those messages. Then we had to give him up. So we turn him over to Bosaso PD. There's some dicey things going out in town. So we kit up pretty hard on the vehicles, all the vests and weapons and all. And we drive out to the airport in the middle of the night. A plane comes flying in, totally blacked out, and it's sitting there waiting. The White House is watching this. I mean, this is fairly decent size event. So the Situation Room's watching it. JSOC main is CENTCOM. There's 4 layers of predators and manned aircraft watching us on this flight line. We look at the GPS that's in his shoe and we're like, holy cow, they're actually coming to the airport. I think we didn't give them enough time to figure out what to do. Like, it was only a few hours that they had. They're driving Shibin out. They pull up and Brian is on the stairs of the plane. I go over and the Somali guy hands me Shibin. He's got a blindfold on. I take it off and I show him my FBI creds. This is the first time I said I was in FBI. I just said I was Rob before. So I said, Mr. Shibin, I'm Rob D'Amico with FBI. You're under arrest for murder of 4 Americans. And he looks at me, he goes, are you going to kill me? And I really think like he thought I was just going to shoot him in the head and I was going to get on the plane and leave. And it kind of dawned on me, like, that's the way they would do it. I kind of looked up at the sky because I knew everyone's watching this. We're bringing you back. And I just said, actually, Mr. Shibin, you're probably the safest guy on the planet right now. We're going to bring you back to the U.S. and you're going to stand trial just like anyone else. And that's how we do it.
And did he believe you?
Yeah. I mean, when we started walking him up, I don't know how soon it sunk in, but what was odd was he had $1,200 on him that he didn't have before. So I think he had that money and he gave it to his nephew that was in that unit. And when he went back to the Basaso PD, he got the money back. If he had known, he would have bribed his way out of, but I don't think anyone really knew that they were turning him back over to us. So he gets on the plane. We fly back to Djibouti and we transfer to a Marine helicopter because we couldn't stay in Djibouti for more than 2 hours. We fly out to ship that night. I'm dragging around his suitcase because it's evidence up and down ships things. The next morning, fly back to Djibouti. The FBI G5 comes in, fly him back and get met. On that plane, though, was the FBI case agent and some other folks. When we were on the Navy ship with the Marines, he said, do you think I need a lawyer? And I just safely said, are you in taking your right to counsel? And he said, yes. We stopped talking to him then. He's already given us enough. He then unmirandized himself on the G5 flight home, then figures out he needed a lawyer again and requests a lawyer. And all that went through court. As we got back, I go back to my house. Brian stayed there and finished out his tour in Nairobi. So we go to trial for him, like explain it out. Again, it was like a movie. No one really understood. I was gone a total of 8 weeks from the time I got the phone call to the time I got home was 8 weeks. So that quick trip turned into 2 months.
Wow.
So go to court. The pirates that were on the vessel, 2 of them that they figured out did the shooting, they were all convicted. And those 2 that they went after the death penalty, and they missed the death penalty by 1 juror. So it was 1 person didn't want to sentence him to death, but they're all serving life terms. Shibin goes to trial. I testify this whole chase game with them. The victims' families never heard what we went through to get him. So he ends up getting convicted. He got 10 life terms plus 280 years or something like that, something crazy. Judge basically said he wished he could have put the death sentence on him. After I testify, the daughter of the couple that owned the sailboat came over to me and just started crying. And she's like, I never knew that you guys went through all that to get him. I'm like, yeah, it was what we do. And she goes, oh, I wish I could thank the SEALs that tried to save him. I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't. She goes, I know they're secret. And I said, no, that's not why. I said 6 months after this happened, that entire troop that stormed the Quest was over in Afghanistan on a helicopter that got shot down called Extortion 17. And I said they were all killed.
Oh my God.
And she just broke down crying. I mean, she just did not expect that. And they were. And Jonas was the troop commander, and they were killed in that famous helicopter crash, Extortion 17. I did find out, though, one of the guys that was on it, though, he got injured and didn't make that deployment. So he is alive. So there's 1 SEAL from that unit that did not get killed in that helicopter crash that was on the rescue attempt.
Let's dedicate this episode to them.
Yes, absolutely. Extortion 17, that was August 6, 2011.
Wow. Chills. As I'm listening to you tell this story about what happened, I think the most amazing thing is all of the components that were involved. And one of the things that I like to stress whenever it comes up is the myth that we don't work well with others. And the one thing that you said over and over again when you talked about, a SEAL team or a Navy person, JSOC, is that you already knew them, that we were already working with them, and that unlike what people imagine, is that we do play well with others.
We do. And it just understanding everyone's equities and what's important to them. There was friction in the beginning, not of this op, but I'd been with the SEALs for trying to think how many years at that point. So we knew each other so well. Everyone trusts each other. You're not going to screw them over and stuff. And that was the way it was. That came out of 9/11 because it had to be that way with so many things. But it was just tremendous people helping. Even the CIA, who sometimes you do butt heads with the CIA. As soon as they heard what we were working, they're like, hey, just let us know what you need. And even State Department until the end when they thought I was just going to cause a world incident or something.
You shared with me a number of news articles about this case, and so I will have them in the show notes. I also will have something about the SEAL team that we're dedicating the episode to in the show notes. This was just a fascinating look at a component of the FBI that most of us never even think about. And again, you were the ideal person, having spent 10 years active in the Marines and then another 20 as a reservist. And so combining your military service with your FBI career definitely had you in the right place at the right time in order to investigate and resolve this matter.
Yeah, it was perfect timing. Brian being a Green Beret, Lance being combat controller, knew everyone. And if I didn't know someone, they knew him. So it just really worked out well.
All right, so we are at the point of the interview where I like to learn your origin story. So, when and why did you join the FBI?
Joined the FBI in 1995. Actually, after I was in the Bureau, my mom found something that I'd written in second grade, said, "What do you want to be?" And it said Marine and FBI agent. Probably saw a Marine movie, but I don't remember anything young that I would put FBI. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps in high school. I wanted to just go on active duty as a Marine. My parents wanted me to go to college. So we settled on, I enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserves and went to college. I majored in accounting because I knew, one, I was awful in English, and my dad was an accountant, and FBI took accounting majors, I heard. So I said, well, if the Marines don't work out, FBI accounting. Went in the Marine Corps, and then I ended up getting off active duty in 92. The Marine Corps was shrinking, and I thought I'd stay in, and I didn't. When I got out, though, the Bureau was in a hiring freeze. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I went back into the Marine Corps Reserves. I was doing some active duty with them, and then started teaching. My reserve unit was in Mobile, Alabama, and we actually started working with FBI there, teaching them urban climbing and some other stuff that the Marine unit I was with was doing. And then Richard Macon, who was a legend in the Bureau, he said, hey, we're about to open up hiring, and you being a Marine officer and an accounting guy, you need to put in. And this was November. I took my test, and I was at the academy by February because the FBI hadn't hired anyone in so long. I'd already had a clearance, not that they still do their own clearances, but a Marine officer, accounting major that had a clearance. I went through the process very quick. I got on. I remember saying, like, I joined the Marine Corps because being a Marine meant something to me, just the word. Same thing with FBI. If you're going to do law enforcement, I saw it as epitome of law enforcement. That's what pushed me to HRT too. So it was one of those things that everything though worked out. I ended up doing 2 years undercover, only 1 year in. The Forrest Gump career, I fell into things at the right timing, right situation. And it was just, I always feel guilty when people thank me for my service because I had so much fun doing it and I loved it that I feel guilty that people thank me for something that, changed my life that was so much in the better.
There's so much during your career that I want to touch on, but I know that you received a number of awards, both FBI and from Canada, for meritorious achievement. What is this Canada award?
We helped recover Canadian hostage that was being held by the Taliban. Yeah, and it was another story I actually did on my podcast with Jim Taraska. Again, it was just a crazy situation that they felt that we deserved an award, and is pretty nice.
Well, definitely sounds like it. So you retired from the FBI in 2021. And what did you do?
I went into corporate chief security officer, the company that didn't work out. They said they wanted to clean something up. And I think when I figured stuff out that it just wasn't exactly what they wanted. And then just started doing consulting work. I do a lot of media stuff now with a bunch of different news, network news agencies, doing a podcast and working with a software startup company that I think is going to just on the verge of going big.
What is the name of your podcast? I definitely want to put a link in the show notes.
It is called Inside the Line with Rob, and it's on a channel called True Crime Talk. A podcaster, Surviving the Survivor, is on his podcast a lot, and they have a second channel where some of his best guests have started doing podcasts. So I'm on episode 4. I got to coordinate that this week. But it's been fun because, I have people on talk about crime or experiences like this. But yeah, Inside the Line with Rob, Instagram, Facebook, and X. I do all my announcing on the podcast. I do them live. I just have a little bit more fun because I don't have to do any post-production stuff.
Yeah, good for you. I do a lot of pre and post-production on mine. Well, I'll definitely have all the links so people can know where to go to listen to your podcast. I'll have that in the show notes for this episode. There's so much about your career that we could talk about today, but we've been talking now for a long time. So I think I'm just going to have you back.
Okay. This is not a quick story to give it justice.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Now we are at the time of this podcast where I like to give my guest the last word. So what would you like to say?
I think this all goes back to we as Americans do things a certain way. We do it the right way. We don't cut corners. And that's why I joined the Bureau. And I think that's what separates us from a lot of places. And the other thing is, it's a team. We talked about it. I've never done anything alone. It's always been a good team. It's one of those that can't talk enough about Lance and Brian and Kate and all the other folks that were involved in this and all the SEALs that helped. So it was a win for the U.S.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com where you'll find a photo of retired agent Rob D'Amico, a longer bio with links to his website and podcast, Inside the Line with Rob, as well as links to news articles about the Somali pirate hijacking of the Quest and several case-related images. There's also a link to FBI Retired Case File Review episode 137 with retired agent Mark Thundercloud, where you can learn more about how the FBI negotiates for the release of Americans kidnapped overseas and about the Captain Phillip case. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.